The business problem that we encounter every day is
You said there are two forces that are at play. That is the billing time demand and billing time supply. The billing time demand is essentially inefficiencies which stacking up one over the other and that put the demand on the billing time supply. And usually the billing time supply is an outsourced organization if it's a small business, right?
it's outsourced, or the big structural problem on the supply side is it's a fixed time supply model. That's the big problem with the industry.
Today's guest is Ashwin Ramasamy. He is the co-founder and CEO of Moative, a studio helping energy, industrial, and healthcare organizations navigate AI and automation. A seasoned technologist and entrepreneur, he has built and sold multiple tech companies and now focuses on guiding industries through the next wave of intelligent automation.
Really big strategic risk to small businesses in healthcare is business intelligence doesn't reside within their business. And my objective is to try and change that, is to try to put the business intelligence where the source of intelligence lies, which is really with who takes care of patients, right?
What we are doing with AI is flipping that narrative and saying, you don't need a system of record, that's dumb. What you need is a system of intelligence which will pull back and say, wait a minute, something is going wrong. Let's find out what's going wrong. They will become the best and brightest employee that you need not hire. That's the difference between this class of software and the EMRs and the PMs. The EMRs and PMs are actually in a very vulnerable position.
Hey everybody, this is Bob Kowalick with Rehabbing Your Revenue Cycle. And I'm on today with Ashwin Ramasamy. Ashwin is a founder of a company called Moative. And we are working with Moative. By the way, transparency, tell you right up front that we have engaged with Moative to do some strategic development in, the area of, artificial intelligence, automation, RPA, looking at how we solve fundamental business problems. But Ashwin is not the typical guy that you're going to run across in our circles. He has really been largely involved in building technology companies. In the past, he has built and sold two tech companies. And Moative is his current focus, and it's a studio that's helping industries focused in energy, industrial, and healthcare kind of strategically deal with this whole AI, automation, what's coming. So I just want to introduce you to Ashwin. He's a great guy. We've been working together now for a few months. We've got a lot of things that we plan to do together, and I'll let him tell you a little bit more about himself here at the beginning.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, Bob. This is such a different kind of conversation for me because I usually stay within my echo chamber. So thanks for pulling me off of that and bringing to the real field. Yeah, I've been learning a lot about healthcare thanks to your vision and your point of view on how revenue cycle management has to evolve with the new tools available thanks to AI. And so it's been a fascinating journey and looking to unpack it for our audiences as well.
Yeah, awesome. And I really appreciate you spending some time with me on this today. So for the audience's sake, for those that may not already know, we service the physical therapy and occupational therapy private practice industry. Essentially, we have some edge cases where we're doing some different things, but the business problem that we encounter every day is, in its most simplest form, the way that I state it is there's a lot of complexity in healthcare revenue cycle. And the more complexities there are, that's a counterforce to just about everything a business wants to do. It wants to be financially stable. It wants to scale. It wants to have healthy operating profit margins. It wants consistency and results and outcomes and predictability. It wants team integrations. It wants communications. Everyone wants these things. But to me, complexity is the enemy. And I've been in a little bit different view of healthcare and revenue cycle for about 5 or 6 years now. What we realized quite some time ago was that the complexities that get in the way of all these great objectives that our client base has are largely created inside their own businesses. And there's one central function that everyone has, whether you do it for yourself, internal to the practice, or whether they outsource it, a billing company, right, that is the billing process. And what we came upon a long time ago was that the billing function which is a series of many tasks, we break it down to about 50 tasks, is affected by everything else in revenue cycle. Every other thing that happens, every function, every process, every task, everything that goes on in a healthcare practice, and this isn't unique to PT and OT, I believe this is true across all of healthcare provider space, affects
Right.
the biller. Right? If you have a credentialing problem, your biller has headaches. If you have an authorization management problem, affects your biller. If you didn't do a verification of benefits correctly, affects your biller. If you didn't register the patient correctly, affects the biller. If the clinician doesn't document medical necessity right or use coding correctly or modifiers, or affects the biller. If there's a systems problem, it affects your biller. There is nothing in revenue cycle that doesn't affect the biller. So what we've done is converted the biller into a business intelligence data generator. Because they're affected by everything, I just came to this place where I believed that we should be using the biller and the billing task, the billing process, to identify the data that explains the complexities that are working against everyone's objectives. And so we have a very unique model. And I think, let me just pause there for a second, because I think that vision, that different, that's something to do with why you even want to connect with me in the first place. It's you're in a position of kind of being picky and choosy about who you'd want to work with. So maybe from your perspective, not being a healthcare guy, but being somebody who's in the healthcare space, give your perspective at a high level as to why you think what we're doing in both Revenue Cycle Solutions and Ascend, as the Ascend Solutions being the data platform company, why that's important today.
I think the way you've built Ascend is super fascinating for me, because I still remember our first conversation. You said there are two forces that are at play. That is the billing time demand and billing time supply.
Yeah.
Right. And the billing time demand is essentially inefficiencies which stacking up one over the other, and that put the demand on the billing time supply. And usually the billing time supply is an outsourced organization if it's a small business, right?
Yeah, it's outsourced, or the big structural problem on the supply side is it's a fixed time supply model. That's the big problem with the industry.
Yes. And nobody wakes up saying, let me throw in some complexity into this. The reason that happens is because, of course, there is the training cost involved in it. There's complexity for the sake of complexity, which we have found a lot in healthcare, which is kind of unusual for me, because in the world of energy and industrial, they're all about efficiency, because you cannot have a power outage for 5 minutes and it'll be okay. There are so many EMR systems, and each one, purely from a technical point of view, each one belongs to a different era. And so the complexity that an average employee faces when they go in and post a claim or do statusing is unusual. And this is not the kind of complexity other industries deal with. And that actually comes and bites the business owner who's running a single location clinic. They can go in and figure out this complexity, but they cannot be doing all the function or overseeing it all the time. So that is the bottleneck. But when we started speaking, you had the metadata of, you had done a time and motion study of where all the time sinks are, where all the complexities are, and not just opinions, but down to the minute. This is the first time I'm not using the word down to the minute as a metaphor, but as a real thing, right? So you have down to the minute understanding of what that billing time demand is and how that breaks down and where the inefficiencies are. That's really good data. And that kind of data is not, it's an exception, I would say. The advantage with having that kind of visibility into the processes is that kind of is the first point of understanding the process as is before designing the process to be.
Yeah, that's really, let's get into that a little bit, because again, and I am not a technologist. Okay. I can't write code. I don't, I come from a background of root cause analytical problem solving, right? If you're, as a physical therapist, if somebody comes to me with back pain and I don't really get down to why they have back pain, I can't help them. I can't help them on any long-term sticky basis, right? So I have always believed it's all about the why behind the what, right? And the what is so many moving parts in the typical practice that aren't optimized there aren't great systems and controls because there really isn't the right data set out there in healthcare. What these practices get for data is whatever their EMR or their practice management system gives them. And EMRs and PMs, as we call them, weren't designed by, for the most part, people that really understand the root causes of what goes on in the business of managing patient care, right? And trying to get paid. Our clients, are small businesses. They do not, they're kind of at the mercy of who owns and holds the data, right? So who has all the data in healthcare? It's the insurance company. It's the software companies that they depend on, that they work with every day. But what I see as a really big strategic risk to small businesses in healthcare is business intelligence doesn't reside within their business. It's all external to their business, and it's not really available to them. And my objective is to try and change that, is to try to put the business intelligence where the source of intelligence lies, which is really with who takes care of patients, right? So, and most of these practices are not big enough, strong enough, financially profitable enough to spend the kind of money it would take to really deliver or create systems for themselves that help them become intelligent operating businesses. And so to me, data is the foundation of all of this, that any kind of strategy, money spending, decisions made about automations, improvements, optimizations, whatever it is, has to be based on the right data, or there's a much higher likelihood of just marching down the wrong path. You correct me if I'm wrong, but I've read some stuff that says in the world so far about $8 trillion has been spent in AI development at about an 80% fail rate to produce an ROI. And maybe that's changing as because things are changing so fast, but we kind of started with a lot of off-target, large amounts of dollars being spent because the data is not really the best data. And so I believe that we're in a position to help guide and direct and strategically make better decisions because we have better data.
Right. I mean, so the most famous report in the world of AI now is the MIT report, which says nearly 80% of the projects fail. But I want to take this opportunity to to correct that narrative. That report had some data, and they had done like wrong data analysis.
Okay,
So
so even they had the wrong data.
yeah, they think the
Yeah.
data, they just analyzed it wrong. So what it turns out is, I mean, and we went back, we looked at it, we didn't believe it. We went back and looked at all the other waves of technology changes, all the way from the internet to mobile to cloud, and how adoption was and how failure rates were. And what we came up with is nearly 30% of the pilots that companies do with AI go to production, which is more than cloud, more than mobile, and so on. So 1 in 3 projects actually go to go live, which is encouraging, but it does not take away the fact that data is the source of or the starting point. And if data points in a different direction and you go in that direction, it may be a wrong direction. So you need to be sure that like your data is like clean. I want to touch upon this topic called data sovereignty. You as a business owner is the source of this data, but then like you have incumbents in the landscape, which are like big 800-pound gorillas like the EMR systems and the PM systems, which are funded by large like private equity or public companies. There is power imbalance, but there's good news. That power imbalance is breaking now thanks to AI. And here's how it's breaking. All these systems are called systems of record. I post a claim, the claim goes and resides in one system. A patient visits my clinic, it goes and falls into a database inside the practice management software. So they don't know what transpired between the patient and the receptionist. All they see is a record has been created. So it's data at rest. It stays there. It doesn't tell the story because it's a record, nothing more, nothing less, right? What you really want software to do is intelligent stuff. Why are there so many claims of a certain kind, and why are they getting rejected in one insurer while it's not getting rejected by another insurer? What kind of IDs fail often, and why are they failing? And is it because somebody is keying in the information wrong? Or like, is it because there's always an exception and people don't catch that exception? Do people make certain kinds of mistakes with codes only when few things confluence together? These are all questions a smart person who has the time will ask. The software does not. The software simply spits back saying, well, it's not working, right? That is
Yeah.
changing. Now, what we are doing with AI is flipping that narrative and saying, you don't need a system of record. That's dumb. What you need is a system of intelligence, which will pull back and say, wait a minute, something is going wrong. Let's find out what's going wrong, right? So the agents or like the chat GPT type of things that we are talking about, one thing to remember here is if you tell an AI agent saying, here's the current process, and here's where the process has to be, and go through this process, we teach the agent to go through that process, and you give it like 50 or 500 past cases of like where things have gone right or gone wrong, the agent will start learning, right? They will become the best and brightest employee that you need not hire. That's the difference between this class of software and the EMRs and the PMs. The EMRs and PMs are actually in a very vulnerable position. So Bob, the work that we do with you is essentially about triaging the statuses, stack ranking a priority, and so on. And we don't need the EMR's permission or the PM's permission to do that. And we
Yeah.
can do it like in the business by observing the processes they are doing and how the people work. And if you take the power of the EMR systems and give it in the hands of like the business owner, and they can run this, they can go and post things wherever they have to be posted, but do the people's job, then there is at some point in time, someone smart will stand up and ask the question, hey, all the decisions are made by my agents, all the mistakes are fixed by my agents, AI agents. Then all I need is a place to store the decisions and the data. Why do I need an expensive EMR? And that question will come in the next 2-3 years. That's
Yeah.
what they are.
And so, you know, I've in the past tried to have crystal balls. They've never been all that successful for me, but I understand what you're saying, and I believe that to be true. But I also believe that in today's reality, right now, the EMR, the PM, it has a lot more data than these companies have taught their systems how to use, so that their outputs, right, the output is far less valuable than what is potentially there within the systems. But even in the best case scenario, because as you said, that you're capturing these snapshots of a record in a sense, and it's static information. In order for intelligence to come in and put pieces together and make smarter observations and directions and conclusions and whatever, what you don't want, especially in healthcare, is AI, automations, whatever you want to call it, guessing, right? It has to be right. And so there's risk, there's trust issues, there's things like that everyone deals with today. And what I believe is that what's missing to minimize the need for AI to make assumptions and try to fill in a gap and to be more on target with what kind of intelligence could come from it is the data that we're creating, right? It's the integration of what the root cause of the problem is that creates a claim risk and then has significant impact on this billing time demand, billing time supply balance. And you mentioned that, so I'll run with it for a second. But revenue cycle management, which revenue cycle, for those of you who that may be a new term to, is essentially every task, function, process that impacts if, when, or how much you're paid for a provider service interaction between a provider and a patient. Everything that impacts if, when, and how much. There's a lot of stuff. A lot of things touch if, when, and how much. So if there's something that happens that's a risk to those three things that creates problems for, getting paid, how much you're getting paid, how long it's taking to get paid, and as important, I believe, is the cost involved in getting paid, right? It is a problem against any kind of objective that a business owner, would have for any business. So where we've landed is where the whole revenue cycle world is focused on is creating fixed time supply models. They say,
Mhm.
well, I'm paid X, so I have to translate that into FTEs and people, and that's my time supply. The reality is time demand variance is absolutely off the charts. Huge amounts of demand based on how much complexity there is in all of these moving parts. And what we have data around is 260 different sources of complexity that impact the 50 different tasks that have to go on to billing, as you made mention of, to the minute, over millions of claims. And so where we've been focused for years now is understanding the drivers of billing time demand. And since outcome is a variable, there's all kinds of no matter where you look, you got happy practices that their AR is clean, their time to pay is short, everything's great, and the exact opposite. It's awful. AR is just a pile of a mess. Money's not there, revenue's down, costs are up, and it's a disaster. And every single point in between exists. Um, and every condition can be explained by the condition of the balance between billing time demand and billing time supply, because that outcome is a variable based on that reality. How aligned is time demand and time supply? And if your focus is on fixed time supply modeling, which is what everyone does except us, you can never explain time demand because you are not from a science perspective, you're not in a position to really study the variables that impact time. Time is what it's
Yeah.
going to be. It never changes because I have a fixed time supply. But what we need is time supply models that adjust based on time demand, which is determined by complexity, so that the outcome becomes a constant. And so if demand's going to go up, time's got to go up, or outcomes are going to suffer. If complexity's up, demand is up, time better go up, or outcomes going to suffer. And so the core problem in all of healthcare revenue cycle is the amount of complexity in the system that drives the time demand side of the equation, and how we understand. And first, understand, and understanding means quantify, create data that explains the size of the problem. What is the complexity problem? And that's what we've done. We can define the complexity problem better than anyone. How that translates into time demand is kind of complicated, but we're literally this week, I think I'm launching our first engineered time supply model based on the time impact of every single complexity variable and how it impacts time demand, because we have to become much more sophisticated about how we create time supply modeling based on time demand realities, which is all driven by complexity. So I'm sounding like a broken record, but it is all about the complexities, defining them, quantifying them, and then strategically looking at where the biggest issues lie so that operationally we can fix those. And I believe that there's just tremendous opportunity in AI, automations, RPA, based on the right data, to really accelerate solving this problem so that everybody, including the little guy, can operate
Right.
like this majorly dialed in, sophisticated business. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do.
Yeah, there are 2 points I'm going to take off from what you just said, which is the small business owner or anyone for that matter the size does not matter. Nobody comes to work saying, I'm so excited looking at 5 more dashboards today. So that's like, a lot of data for me to consume without like telling me which knobs to turn.
Yeah, that's
And most of the times what I need is to know which knobs to turn, right? The and you kind of like pointed the relationship between complexity, time demand, and time supply and outcomes. If complexity increases and the outcome is constant, then the time supply has to increase. But the beautiful thing that is happening now is I'm not saying AI is going to give unlimited time out of nowhere, but it's going to significantly reduce time that goes on some repeatable, predictable grunt work, right? So if you have 2x or 3x more time without adding people, complexity remains where it is. Complexity is represented by data in your case, because you've done this time and motion study like a million times over, and we all know what outcome we are working towards. Then, then like your model really shines because with your understanding of the outcomes that need to be produced and the complexities that are there, you're teaching the AI model what the complexity means and how it impacts the outcome. And you're not teaching one AI agent. You can teach one AI agent and then clone it by 10. So it can process through like 500 claims a day or like 5,000 claims a day. At this point in time, the question is only about economics of compute, right? It's not about hiring people and training them, right? There will always be exception cases. 60% of the cases will be, or 70% of the claims will be handled by the agents themselves. The 30% will come back to the humans. That is worth spending time on. So if one of the 3 dimensions is going to be partially solved, then like you have much better handle of like solving complexities and producing deterministic outcomes. That's the exciting part about AI.
yeah. So let's talk about this is evolutionary, right? It's not like snap your finger and everything's changed tomorrow. And that evolution through I think what we've talked about so far and establishes that the right data matters, that the data ultimately determines the level of intelligence that can be created by AI. And yes, you don't want 82 different tabs worth of data to try to figure out what's going on. You want simple outputs that direct strategy and decision making, right?
Mhm.
But it's a complicated problem, right? The behind the scenes, to me, it's like a duck on a pond, right? Looks like nothing's going on on the surface. It's just floating around. You look underneath, and those little legs are just working like crazy, right? So the the amount of the complexity is real, whether you're aware of it or not. Most people are unaware of how much complexity exists in their systems, in their tasks, and their processes from whatever source. I don't know if I said this already, but 78%, we've quantified millions of complexity incidents. 78% all come from internal to the practice. 12% come from the payers. The other 7% come from the systems, the EMR, the PM, and the clearinghouse. So if you want to solve the problem, you have to look internal. You have to look at inside the provider organization, essentially, in order to solve the problem. That's where 78% of the problem is. You're not going to fix your payers. I'm not going to change UHC. I may be able to influence UHC with enough data over time about how complicated they are to work with as a payer, which is one of my objectives. But, we got to focus where we actually have control. And we have control over the stuff we do every single day, day in and day out. So to get to a simple solution to a very complex problem requires a certain amount of complexity in the middle to translate complexity into simplicity. And that's where AI is going to be super helpful, is in processing all of the moving parts, right? The human brain is, there's variance in how well people's brains do this kind of thing, but the best brain there is will never compete with a properly trained AI agent or agent swarm or whatever that understands the interrelationships. It's all about relativity of this relative to that. And if this is changing like this and that's changing like that, then this problem and the ability to get to that kind of solution is going to require AI to help us get there.
Yeah, and what you said is very counterintuitive. Like we keep using EMRs and like the other systems as punching bags, saying how bad they are, but you don't need to solve those problems because 78% of like your problems are internal to how your company operates. And that data and that process and that complexity, you have complete control over. And
Absolutely.
if you start doing something with AI, that's kind of where you look at. You don't need to take the hardest challenge of like working with an EMR or a clearinghouse to begin with. You can start internal to your organization. The middle complexity that you're talking about, which AI does the traffic controller, so to speak, like understanding the relationship between various parts of the puzzle and so on. That is true also. In fact, when we say drop AI in the middle, the question that people have, and the press usually catches on to where AI fails because it makes for good news. So, and here's also where, your model of like starting with the data which answers the why question well is important. It's guaranteed that if someone puts in a chat GPT inside their clinic today and says, here are 20 claims, can you interpret it for me and post it inside like, one of the EMRs, it will do it. They have agent mode these days. They can log into our website and do it, but it'll get 70% of it right. And it'll look like very comforting when you see the first few things right and then it fails. And then you would have like a complete disbelief that, hey, man, this thing failed. Right. So the difference between a good implementation and bad implementation is simply about data. And the data says, and the more data you have, the more conviction you have on why something happens the way it happens. And
Yeah.
this reflects on what is called as evals, evaluation of agents. So I can code an agent to follow a happy path, but if you have 30 different ways like a claim processing effort can fail, that is all data point. And that should be the agent should be put through all of those and evaluated to see how it reacts. So the more evaluation parameters and more evaluation scenarios we can give the agent, the more it's going to behave. Right. So there
Yeah.
too, it's important that like we map all the whys because the whys is where like the AI gets the training. If I don't focus on the whys, if I don't focus on the current processes, and I directly say, this seems to be an intelligent tool, let me just like unleash it, that's kind of where things break.
Yeah. I mean, I get accused of being too complicated, right? But it's a complicated problem. You got to match complexity with the right level of complexity to bring it down to something simple. And
I
and,
think
and
I think it's a positioning problem, Bob. I mean, I wouldn't say complexity to match the complexity. I would say sophistication. What you're doing is
yeah,
sophisticated. Yeah.
that's a much better term. Yeah, thank you. So yeah, this is back to data for a second. So we've talked about billing time, supply, time demand being in balance, really being what revenue cycle management is about. When you're in that balance, things work. Most of the problem, though, and the variance is in the time demand. And when we match that with a fixed time supply, outcomes blow up. So what we've seen now, so when we look at the billing time demand, how complexity translates into time demand specific to billing process,
Mhm.
the biggest, and this is probably people will say, oh, I would just intuitively know this, but the biggest function inside of billing that's impacted by time demand is the accounts receivables management piece. There's a lot more AR, unpaid claims that have to be followed up on and worked and fixed that are denied, partially paid, underpaid. Nothing's happened. They've landed in a black hole out there somewhere in the insurance company universe. And I've done some roll-ups recently that were very interesting. So what we quantify is, so let's just establish that complexity from any source translates into billing time demand. Okay. And so we quantify all of this complexity, which comes from many places. We just call them billing time inflators. Okay. They are operational in nature. So we call them operational time inflators. They are operations, tasks, the root cause or source of the complexity comes from an operational task that will show itself if you have the right kind of systems in place. This is what we've created as a data platform that tracks all this. We'll be able to quantify and explain every source of an operational task problem that created time inflation event in billing. So we normalize that to get to some kind of benchmarking and say, well, what's normal? How many mistakes? How many, as a percentage of my claims, how much is a big problem? How much is a small problem? So we're years into quantifying this. So the incidence rate, we normalize this by saying per 100 visits per month. So I get a data point that allows me to compare a 10,000 visit a month practice to a 500 visit a month practice, because it's about the quantity of these things per 100 visits per month. This literally is the most important, meaningful, valuable metric in all of healthcare RCM, as far as I'm concerned, because it tells you the complexity picture. Now, we've also taken it a step further, and we've come up now with the ability to tag every scenario, and right now we track about 260 of them, with a time cost. This is a 1-minute problem. That's a 3-hour problem. And there are 3-hour problems, by the way, right? There are 3-hour problems that are going to yield $0, right? Biggest problem of all, spend all the time and never get paid, right? So we're now in a place of being able to say, well, these things cost this much time, which translates into money. And so we can now quantify that a little further by adding a severity component to it and combining a severity view with a volume view to get a real score on the amount of complexity that exists. Okay.
Right. Yeah, you finish, then I have a point to make. Yeah.
Okay. So with this data, what I can now show is that if we get to beyond 15 per 100, so 15% of your claims had a time inflation event, the amount of time spent that is needed in accounts receivables management starts to deflect up and become exponential in terms of its rate of increase. When we get out to the extremes of what we see in our actual clients, the variance from optimized low complexity, the lowest, which is less than 5, to the highest, which is over 50, believe it or not, they break half of their claims or more. The amount of time spent per claim in accounts receivables denial management goes up 4,000%.
Wow.
How do you staff a 40x variance in time demand? It's impossible, right? So the only solution is reduce the complexities that inflate the time. The focus has to be on complexity reduction.
Right. In fact, I think like most first generation AI systems that we see now would look at a localized problem. They would look at a specific claim rejection and say, like, I'm going to, post a response, and it'll draft a beautiful response, post it, keep following up, and maybe even use a voice agent to call up and ask what's going on with it, and so on and so forth. Looking at it in an isolated instance, it seems like the right thing to do. But if I drop Bob into the picture, what Bob would say is, even if you solve this claim, it's not going to matter because this is not the most important claim. And even if you spend 3 hours of solving it, it's not going to improve your AR metrics like in any meaningful way. This is not the class of problems you should be spending time on. You would rather spend time on a different set of claim rejections, because there the payout is more. So these are, call it wisdom or call it like expertise, practice, and whatnot. today's AI tools are good enough to solve the grunt work, but they don't ask the expert questions or the wisdom questions. With the metadata that you have captured, you can actually train the AI to be wise, not just intelligent, right?
Mhm.
That's the biggest benefit to the small little clinic that you would go and deploy this to, because it's going to start questioning the decisions or the priorities for the AI system or for the humans working on it, not from the perspective of the business owner. He or she only sees his clinic, but you have like a bird's eye view of, like, how many other clinics you worked with. So you will always step back and ask a question, why are we focusing on this? And now you can train an AI to do that.
Yeah, and so talk about the value of the amount of data, assuming it's the right data. The more data, the better. Think of this as in a context of understanding what normal is, understanding what abnormal is, understanding what really bad is or really good is. That the broader the data universe that's contributing to the community experience, in a sense, the bigger that community that's providing the data, that's contributing to the data, the more value everyone gets that's part of that data universe.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. So the there is generative and then there is deterministic AI, right? Generative is predicts the next word. So this word comes, and most likely the next word is going to be this. I'm going to say that word. That's how, like, when you chat with ChatGPT, that's what it's doing. But like the more structured data that you're going to provide to AI, saying, here's how this class of claims have always behaved in terms of time demand, or like, here's how the AR for these types of codes have always been. So when you give deterministic data, you can actually, build a predictive model which is not generative. You can say the failure rate of any claim which has a combination of these codes is going to be Y. And then you can point it to a generative system and say, you know what, like, we have these codes, and here's why, like, we have put these codes for this kind of patient, here's why the treatment is this way, and so on and so forth. It'll start, you can point the AI to start spending more time on those kinds of problems where, like, the machine learning or the predictive models are predicted, saying that here's where the failure is going to be more. So the generative system can spend more time writing a descriptive answer, which is longer than usual, because the data has informed that this needs a lot more explanation.
Yeah, let me
So,
let me let me redirect that statement just slightly. So let me differentiate between coding as in CPT coding and what the provider is translating time into, right? And what they did with the patient. In physical therapy, occupational therapy, coding in that context is not super complicated. If you're in thoracic surgery and other things, it's really complicated.
Mhm.
Uh, but we code all these 260 different time inflation scenarios. We create a code. And we create a code just because, it's a little easier thing maybe in a relational database to deal with. But again, I'm not a technologist, so maybe I'm wrong there. But the combination of your time inflation, your complexity coding will have a ton of predictive value in terms of what your outcome going to be, in terms of how much you're going to get paid, how long it's going to take to get paid, what's the cost to get paid. And this is what we're trying to create in terms of modeling around this data. There's just so much that we can do with it. And the more participation we have in creating this knowledge base, right, specific, to a certain specialty, the more value the data has to help everyone's, business. And ultimately that's, the scale of this matters. And so it doesn't matter to me whether, well, if your billing's outsourced to some other billing company, then there's not much we can do for you there because we don't have access, right? Obviously, we do all of this for every client that we serve. We translate every billing task into business intelligence that we provide to the client base, and then collaborate around best practices and how to optimize to reduce complexity. The relationship between the value of a visit, the financial value of a patient, the time it takes to get paid, the cost it takes to get paid. I mentioned the 4,000% increase in accounts receivables denial management time. Once you go from 15 up to 50. The amount of time it takes to get paid over doubles. Time is cost, right? So the cost goes up tremendously. The revenue, the revenue capture, the translating of potential revenue into cash declines. So we have to fix, that problem. But if you're out there and you have internal billers, you have a billing team inside your practice, this is where we could set them up with platform. They could operate under our umbrella, of all of this data, and start to translate your own day-to-day tasks into meaningful data and business intelligence. And then as we together, Moative and Ascend and RCS evolve and develop these solutions that make it easier to translate all this complex stuff into something useful and create automations around where the big time costs are and how we reduce those through very structured, standardized, predictable automations and things to free up humans to still focus on the most complicated stuff, because that's the last place AI is going to end up, right? The more complicated the process, the further off into the future that kind of thing is, and start to evolve through a data-driven optimization type strategy that reduces complexity, reduces time demands, improves the outcomes, improves the scalability and stability of the business. But I believe most importantly, and this is what I'd like to kind of just maybe get your thoughts on in closing here, is that the biggest deficit that I see in the businesses that we service is the intelligence around what their business really is an SME model, subject matter expert model. It lies in people's heads. It's never
Right.
translated into the business intelligence. It's an individual subject matter expert intelligence. They're feeding the data machines of the insurance companies, the EMR companies, and they're sitting there and they're one person out the door away from losing whatever intelligence they've generated because they've never had a system capable of capturing it for them so that they grow and evolve as an intelligent business operation. And that's a problem that needs to be solved.
Yeah, I mean, call it like arming the rebels or like making Davids out of the Goliaths. That's kind of what like you're trying to do. And the foundation of that is, like you mentioned, understanding of the processes, evidence through data. And so far the data is there, and you've been preaching everyone on how to use this data to, like, optimize their ARs. Now you don't need to do that. Now you can build agents in your mold, and those agents would do, not, if not 100%, they'll start with 40 and 50%, and that still moves the needle for the small business. So super excited about, like, the coming together of data and the availability of intelligence on a tap. And yeah, I'm super keen to see where this leads to a year from now when like the clinics actually like put this to use on a daily basis.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you spending time with me today, Ash. How could somebody get a hold of you if they wanted to ping you?
Yeah, I'm on email, ash@moative, moative.com, or I'm pretty regular on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah. Well, great. I'm sure this will be lots of opportunities to talk further, maybe do this again in a couple months. And we kind of had this broad conversation. We'll maybe start to get into some really specific applications and where things are going as we evolve. And anyway, I just think it's coming, right? It's going to affect everybody somehow or another. We're just trying to do this in a way that creates the most value, the most intelligence. Ultimately, we're going to pass through a long period of integration between automations and humans. It's not replacement, it's integration, it's enhancement It's quality. It's taking complexity out, improving productivity. It's still the intelligence is the source is the human mind, right? That then has to be somehow educating something else, and that's happening. But I think there's going to be a lot of evolution there, and it's hard for every individual practice to just individually, as an island of information, just try to solve this problem as a one-off for themselves. They got to be part of a community that's solving the problem, and that's what we're creating through Ascend and RCS, and its foundational value is in the data that's created, which drives the whole picture.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Bob. Pleasure spending this time with you and spitballing. Always fun.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ashwin. Have a good one. All right, see you.